Thank you for tuning into Spirit of Harmony. I'm your host, John Morton, and today I'm back with another solo episode. I'm going to be breaking down one of my favorite songs from one of America's finest bands and tying the track and its history into a faith-based video I saw on YouTube a while back. With Easter drawing near at the time of this recording, as well as the 60th anniversary of the time in this band's history that will be the focus of today's discussion, I figured now was a perfect time to share this reflection with you. This song comes from an album that has been called the greatest unreleased album in popular music history. The album was never completed, yet the material from it that has seen the light of day has moved listeners to argue that it could have permanently altered the trajectory of pop music. The band is the Beach Boys, and the song is Surf's Up. Some of you listening may already be familiar with the Beach Boys' background. Formed in Hawthorne, California in 1961, the original lineup consisted of brothers Brian, Carl, and Dennis Wilson, their cousin Mike Love, and close friend Al Jardine. Bruce Johnson would join the group from 1965 to 1972, roughly the time frame that will be of significance in this discussion, and return in 1978. They initially achieved success with songs that gave a glimpse into youth culture in their home state. The songs captured the innocence and romance of adolescent life in those days magnificently, but also demonstrated signs of greater musical and lyrical complexity to be unearthed. On the subject of examining music and lyrics and how songs speak to me, I'd like to acknowledge the individual who inspired this reflection I wrote a while back, Dr. Christopher West from the Theology of the Body Institute. One of Dr. West's videos that jumped out to me is titled, "The Best Prayer Advice I've Ever Received." In the video, he recalls describing his prayer life to his spiritual director upon meeting him about 20 years ago, expressing frustration at how, in the midst of praying, a Bruce Springsteen or U2 song would suddenly get stuck in his head. Or if it wasn't a song, a scene from a movie or TV show would play out. Having what he described as a pious perspective on prayer, West would try his hardest to get the song or scene out of his head. West's spiritual director asked him if these media were important to him, which West affirmed, stating that they were content that he grew up consuming and still relates to. The spiritual director then posed some questions. Don't you think that God knows the language of your own heart? Have you ever thought that God might be using this music and these movies to communicate to your heart? West had never looked at his listening and viewing habits in this manner, nor had I. In reflecting on this notion, I think West's spiritual director is correct. As a huge music fan, especially of older pop music, certain songs that I listen to do speak to me on a deeper level. They prompt me to reflect on not just my interior world, but those of the people that I encounter as well. So many of us share the same desires and struggles, and in many cases throughout history, art has conveyed what we're feeling far better than we could if we try to put it into words. Lyrically, the stories that these songs tell often present people at their worst and at their best. I often sum up the overarching idea that my favorite artists have laid out in their work in this manner. The world is often a dark place, and mankind can be rather complex, but in the midst of adversity is always capable of achieving a greater good. I believe that is the way God speaks to me through music. Now, moving away from talking about listening to music more intently, let's discuss a song which came at a time where Brian Wilson sought to create Beach Boys music more intently. There are hints of a more thoughtful side of the band in earlier tracks such as In My Room and When I Grow Up to Be a Man, but Brian upped the ante with the release of their seminal album Pet Sounds in 1966. Brian, along with his songwriting partner Tony Asher, took themes that were already prevalent in their work and explored them from a more introspective and spiritual point of view. Gone were the simple tales of admiring beautiful girls and attempting to impress them with a fancy car. One's existence and longing for communion were now examined in relation to a higher power, as you may have heard in the album's best-known tracks. Wouldn't it be nice to picture a couple yearning for their relationship to reach a stage where it is more solidified and purposeful? Wouldn't it be nice to live together in the kind of world where we belong? They recognize the need to place their trust in the divine to navigate this season of dating. Maybe if we think and wish and hope and pray, it might come true. God specifically is recognized as a divine being interceding in the relationship betrayed and God only knows. The protagonist in that song recognizes that his relationship was willed by someone that is not of this world and is not fully comprehensible. He also acknowledges his own human nature, that there are days where loving another person is a challenge. There may be days when he doesn't want to love her, yet he chooses to take on that responsibility every day. His love for her is imperfect, but as long as they're on earth, he will continually give of himself so that she knows it's a love that she can always have confidence in. I may not always love you, but long as there are stars above you, you never need to doubt it. I'll make you so sure about it. God only knows what I'd be without you. Sonically, Pet Sounds is considered an early example of chamber pop, combining drums and guitars with strings and horns. With Brian no longer touring with the Beach Boys at this point in the band's career and devoting his time exclusively to creating their studio albums, he recruited the musicians known as the Wrecking Crew to play on the tracks for the time being. Some unconventional sources of accompaniment were utilized during the sessions, such as bicycle horn on You Still Believe in Me, and a water jug which provides the percussion on Caroline No. At the time of its release, Pet Sounds failed to match the critical and commercial performance of the Beach Boys' previous efforts in the U.S., but its success in the U.K. motivated Brian to push himself even further in his artistic pursuits. He sought to do so with the band's next album, Smile. Smile was envisioned as a concept album delving into American history and culture, along with one's grasp on youth, innocence, and spirituality, woven together with tracks assembled from short, self-contained recordings. The album would be segmented, via tape splicing, in such a way that the point at which one song ended and another began wouldn't always be clear. Van Dyke Parks was recruited as the lyricist working alongside Brian on Smile. Among the most notable pieces the duo wrote together was Surf's Up, the track that many fans and music journalists argue would have served as the album's centerpiece, and rightfully so, in my opinion, as the majority of Smile's themes come together in its lyrics. Despite its title referencing a hobby that was commonly sung about in earlier Beach Boys hits, Surf's Up has nothing to do with surfing. Rather, the song depicts a protagonist who becomes cognizant of the destruction of the world and society around him, and recognizes a need to return to a mindset of childlike innocence to push forward and start life anew. I have a quote from Brian in which he lays out the meaning of the lyrics to Surf's Up that I want to share. This is from an article written by Jules Siegel entitled Goodbye Surfing, Hello God, published in 1967, that documented his time in the Beach Boys' inner circle while Smile was in production. It's a man at a concert. All around him there's the audience, playing their roles, dressed up in fancy clothes, looking through opera glasses, but so far away from the drama, from life. Back through the opera glass you see the pit and the pendulum drawn. The music begins to take over. Colonnaded ruins domino. Empires, ideas, lives, institutions. Everything has to fall, tumbling like dominoes. He begins to awaken to the music, sees the pretentiousness of everything. The music hall a costly bow. Then even the music is gone, turned into a trumpeter swan, into what the music really is. Canvas the town and brush the backdrop. He's off in his vision, on a trip. Reality is gone. He's creating it like a dream. Dove-nested towers. Europe a long time ago. The laughs come hard in Auld Lang Syne. The poor people in the cellar taverns, trying to make themselves happy by singing. Then there's the parties, the drinking, trying to forget the wars, the battles at sea. While at port, a do or die. Ships in the harbor, battling it out. A kind of Roman Empire thing. A choke of grief at his own sorrow and the emptiness of his life, because he can't even cry for the suffering in the world, for his own suffering. And then, hope. Surf's up. Come about hard and join the once and often spring you gave. Go back to the kids, to the beach, to childhood. I heard the word of God. Wonderful thing. The joy of enlightenment, of seeing God. And what is it? a children's song. And then there's the song itself, the song of children, the song of the universe rising and falling in wave after wave, the song of God hiding the love from us, but always letting us find it again, like a mother singing to her children. Of course, that's a very intellectual explanation, but maybe sometimes you have to do an intellectual thing. If they don't get the words, they'll get the music. You can get hung up in words, you know. Maybe they work. I don't know. Surf's Up is a song that I'd never paid much attention to in exploring the Beach Boys catalog, but I found myself gravitating towards it in the wake of Brian Wilson's death last year, and it has undoubtedly become a song that speaks the language of my heart. Any place and any season that we find ourselves navigating in life offers up an opportunity for spiritual enlightenment. At times, it can be tempting to look at the world we inhabit today and the values that many of its people stand for, and fear that man is beyond redemption, that we are truly in exile from God. Many try to distract themselves with material things that they believe will give off the illusion of opulence, such as a diamond necklace playing the pawn, but ultimately hold little value. Brian actually emphasizes that point by using car keys as a percussion instrument to represent the rattling of said necklace in the opening movement of the song. Entertainment is another popular means of forgetting about life, as is the case in Surf's Up. We find the narrator describing the audience at an opera house. All of these diversions can drive us to a point where our hearts do become hardened, beyond belief, broken men too tough to cry. It is as if reality is gone, as Brian describes. Such is the perspective of the individual who only knows despair. What frees us from that mindset as Christians is the ability to choose hope in the midst of difficulty. When we seek God's word and open our hearts and minds to Him, approaching Him with childlike dependence, we receive the wisdom and the strength to navigate any situation we find ourselves in. We recognize that God hands us challenges in our circumstances and relationships because He knows we are always capable of achieving a greater good for ourselves and those around us. In placing our trust in Him, we welcome the blessings each season of life offers and come to see Him in those around us. But we are also able to let go and accept change when our own culminated ruins domino. In reflecting on the music I've listened to over the course of my life, I believe Surf's Up, in its message of embracing the cyclical nature of life, is one of the most powerful examples of how God has spoken to me through music and acknowledged the language of my heart. I believe the importance of choosing faith in lieu of anguish that is emphasized in the song's lyrics apply not only to my life, but that of Brian Wilson's as well. I mentioned early in the talk that the Beach Boys never completed the Smile album in the 1960s. The abandonment of the project is largely attributed to pressure on Brian from the other Beach Boys and the record label to focus on creating more of the commercial hits that had made the band successful to begin with, rather than the abstract pieces Brian and his outside collaborators had put together. Tension arose from all parties involved regarding the direction in which the band was heading creatively. Brian's drug use had also increased during this period, and his mental health, which he had struggled with through much of his life but had successfully navigated up until then by listening to and creating music, began to deteriorate. Brian was often unable to determine which modular pieces would make up a given song, and concerns persisted within the band's inner circle that the project wouldn't be well received by the public. Although a selection of the tracks intended for Smile, including Surf's Up, would be completed for inclusion on subsequent Beach Boys albums released in the late 60s into the early 70s, Brian would see his inability to finish Smile as one of, if not the biggest failure of his career. It was a season of life that gave him psychological trauma that he carried with him for decades. Over the course of that time period, Smile would take on a mythical status among music fans. This was initially attributed to media hype, such as the Siegel article in which Brian explained the lyrics to Surf's Up. Beginning in the late 1970s, bootleg recordings of tracks from the original sessions for the album began to emerge among the public, giving fans an opportunity to speculate amongst each other what the album may have sounded like had it been released in the 60s. Among those fans were two young musicians, keyboardist Arian Sahanaja and guitarist Nick Belusco. Upon meeting in the 1980s, the legend of Smile was one of the first things they bonded over. They went on to form their own band, the Wonderments, in 1992. They became acquainted with Brian Wilson later in the decade, and were ultimately invited to join his band when he toured as a solo artist for the first time in 1999. In 2004, with Darian serving as his musical secretary, and Van Dyke Parks back in the fold to fill in missing lyrics, Brian sifted through those old session recordings, and using them as a reference, pieced together a new iteration of Smile, which he premiered before a live audience before recording and releasing it as a solo album later that year. There's a professional recording of one of these performances on YouTube. Brian's stage presence could come off as rather muted at times, which he attributed to stage fright. However, in this case, there's a joy that very clearly radiates from him, a satisfaction at having a fully realized version of Smile to share with the world, one that he was able to produce with the aid of a team that he trusted to provide him with the emotional security to move past the anxiety and depression that he had long associated with making Smile, and fully convey his vision after nearly 40 years in gestation. The performance and album were met with rousing reviews from fans and critics, putting any worries surrounding reception to rest. The original session tapes from 1966 and 1967 would also be configured into the Smile Sessions album in 2011, providing the closest possible rendition of Smile that audiences could have gotten had it been released way back when. The story behind the Smile album has proven to be a testament to the themes explored in Surf's Up, that choosing hope rather than despair can still bear fruit, even if it doesn't come in the time frame and in the manner that we expected. In examining the composition and arrangement of Surf's Up, I believe Brian Wilson demonstrated an understanding of God's connection to music. In an interview he gave with one of my favorite YouTubers, the Professor of Rock, a few years back, he spoke of the importance of spirituality in his work, saying, "I believe God is music. When you make music, that's God talking to you. I would add that when you listen to music, God is talking to you as well. If we seek God in every facet of life and prioritize our relationship with Him and give it the time to flourish, we come to better appreciate the gifts He bestows upon us. When we place our trust in Him, we can give of ourselves more wholly so that we may provide the same stable presence to our loved ones that He gives to each of us." I hope that this reflection may encourage you to open your hearts and minds to allow God to speak to you through your favorite art, and I thank you for taking the time to listen to today's episode. Love and mercy to you and your friends tonight.